So this is my finished creative component, and I'll talk to you a little bit about it. We're talking about attachment and mentalization, and I wondered about the patterns of attachment when there's childhood maltreatment and how those patterns are passed on to the woman's ability to form healthy attachments, and why abused women sometimes return to their abusers time and time again. To illustrate this is the story of Katie. We're going to call her Katie, and Steve, her partner. Katie was a woman who grew up with an incredibly abusive mother, neglectful. Her mother was an alcoholic. I never really offered anything to Katie. She would introduce several partners in Katie's life, and one of them sexually abused Katie when she was 7 years old. So the attachment with her mother was incredibly disorganized. Katie grew up with a lot of anger, and her behavior started showing in school, and she became extremely belligerent, and she tried to do whatever she wanted. She didn't respect any authority figures. So here's Katie's mom, very angry woman, foul mouth, and she has so many things missing about her in her life. I chose not to do strings of attachment because I thought they would be too minute to reflect the abuse and pain that Katie endured. So I found some driftwood that goes a lot better with the gnarly feelings of the piece. So representing some of the attachment issues with her mom, there was not much there. So Katie grew up to be a very scared and anxious woman, and she had one child at the age of 16, gave up that child to adoption at birth. In Katie, we see a cradle, an empty cradle, and lots of scars, very little contact with her mom. Her mental health was deteriorated. She was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, anxiety, and as she grew up, she had a lot of problems with relationships. She was using drugs, and then met Steve, a much older man. She was 20 years old when she met him, and she was looking in him a caregiver to her. Steve was in his 30s and Katie was 20. And immediately, Katie was a stunningly beautiful woman. Steve pushed her into exotic dancing and introduced her. She didn't want to do that. She was bartending at a biker bar. So he pushed her to exotic dancing, and to take the edge off, introduced her to MDMA, crystal meth, and other hardcore drugs. Katie was drinking heavily at this point to cope, and when beating started, when she couldn't perform on stage because of her drinking. Steve was a man with, or is a man with, a lot of with a broken spirit, with nothing to give, himself victim of child maltreatment, neglect, many incarcerations, one as a youth for the manslaughter of his stepfather with a steel pipe because the stepfather didn't want to lend him a car. Steve really had nothing good to offer to Katie. He was looking after himself. He had no attachment to anybody. And in Katie, he saw a source of income. As Katie couldn't perform as an exotic dancer, pushed her into prostitution, and the beatings, senseless beatings, continued. Steve was a man, or is a man, that couldn't see the impact on Katie. He thought he was doing her a favor, was looking after her, was managing her, was making sure that she ate and also had sufficient drugs at her disposal. And he couldn't see what was wrong with that. During the relationship, Steve went to jail many times, and while he was away, Katie reached out for supports. She tried to sober up. At one point, she gave birth to another child, to a daughter. The daughter also, she left her daughter in the care of a relative as a newborn. And again, we see the recurring empty cradle, emptiness inside her. And she tried to clean up, but she couldn't. The moment that Steve was released, he would press her and go back, and she would go back over and over again. And during one of the times that he was in jail, she found out that she was pregnant, and she decided that she was going to really do better and get rid of him and move on with her life. She was very smart, a very intelligent woman. I had many conversations with her about her life and about her dreams and hopes. I really liked Katie. She was a broken soul, but she had it in her to do better with him being away. She had that child. That's when I met her, when she was pregnant and had her third child. And she intended to parent this child. She did well for a number of months, almost a year, and then Steve came out of jail, and she allowed him back in her life. She started doing intravenous drugs. He introduced her to IV drug use, heroin, and I apprehended her baby. It was very hard to do that because I know that she wanted to do this, but the environment was so dangerous, so incredibly dangerous. Steve just couldn't see that. He could not mentalize. He could not see the impact of his behavior and choices and the abuse on the children and in Katie throughout his history with her. Could not move past the here and the now. Could not see anything other than his own survival. Himself a broken child, and we see a very, very insignificant little boy, very sad and there, lonely. But that was Steve, and his ability to mentalize. There's nothing. He can't offer mentally anything, and certainly emotionally couldn't offer anything to Katie. Yet Katie continued to reach out to him, hoping that he could turn around. In this sense, Katie couldn't mentalize either. She couldn't admit, or she couldn't see, or didn't want to see, avoided, to think that actually Steve couldn't love her, that did not have what it would take to have a relationship with him, an emotional closeness to him. And that would have been too painful for her to really realize that he just couldn't do it. He didn't have it. And Katie had a really hard time as well understanding her mother's behaviors, even though she was now an adult and going through similar situations. Mind you, she was not abusive to her kids for the little time that she spent with them. But the abandonment, the leaving them to somebody else, not thinking about the impact on them. Again, Katie very much lived in the here and the now as well. Her mother was non-existent. Her mother, I forgot to say, her mother committed suicide when Katie was a child. And after her mother died, she went to live with many different relatives, but none of the relatives wanted her long term because of her behaviors. She went to live with her biological father and stepmother, who did not like Katie. This was in her teen years. She was very difficult. So she found herself alone, and she found a family in a group of bikers, older bikers, and that's the life that she led until she met Steve. So this is Katie and the continuum of um, attachment issues, uh, insecure attachment, disorganized attachment, and how it gave way or paved the ground for her mental health issues, development of mental health issues and addictions, and how the addictions um, supported the cycle of poor attachment and trauma. Katie left a big mark in my life because I got to know her for quite some time. I had one of the best conversations about trauma in my career was with Katie. Katie died of an IV overdose at the age of 32. When I heard this news, I had a hard time grappling with it still to this day, and Katie has been gone for probably 10 years now. But this is the sadness of childhood trauma. This is the sadness of poor attachment, disorganized attachment, how important it is to have those lines with your primary attachment figure, and what happens when you don't develop your own attachment, your own appropriate attachment system. The next thing is to try to attach to whoever is around there that might look like a person that offers safety and love. Katie deserved to be loved. Katie deserved to be looked after in a supportive way. And unfortunately, she didn't have it. So this is to Katie and all the women who currently suffer because of that, and their inability, their struggle leaving a relationship that is so painful. And to think that leaving a relationship that is painful is even more painful. That is a tragedy. So thank you. In terms of the piece, it's stoneware. I used very dry glazes, matte glazes, some copper, black glaze. I highlighted some of Katie's life and her mom's and Steve, parts of them that at one point had some light in their lives, because I'm sure that there were positive things. And particularly Katie, she was a really nice girl in unfortunate circumstances. I try to convey Katie's suffering, her tears, her pain, her scars, as well as her mother's. Never met her, of course. But I suspect she had mental health issues. And of course, she was an alcoholic. And her mother just couldn't give her what Katie needed. And Steve, well, Steve has, he's still alive. I don't know where he is now. Katie's daughters were adopted, the last I heard. And yeah, so this is my component. Thank you for listening, and if you can, or if you will, say a little prayer for Katie. Thank you.